Awesome. Well, nau mai, haere mai, and welcome to the Climate Tech and Innovation for Better Futures panel discussion this evening. Ko Jade Tokoingoa, ko tangata tiriti aho. My name is Jade Tang Taylor. I'm the Innovation Director here at Academy EX, and proud kind of tangata tiriti treaty partner as well. Just want to acknowledge mana whenua, the lands of which we work and live, where we're based around Ngāti Whātua Ōrākei. And just want to start with a bit of a karakia to ground us all for this discussion. And then we'll go into a bit more of the details around what's in store for the next 90 minutes. Me karakia tātou. Ko te kawa o runga, ko te kawa o raro. Ko te kawa ora, ko te kawa ora. E rongo e whakaerehia ki runga. Turuturu o whiti whakamaua ki a tina, tina, huie, tākie. Nau mai, haere mai, and welcome. This is a bit of a Earth Futures Collab and Tech Futures Collab panel discussion. And I see some familiar faces, but I also see some new people in the audience as well. So let me just play this little video. Some of you may have seen this before, but just act surprised. It tells you a little bit about what we do at Academy EX.
At Academy EX, we are here on a mission to create impactful futures for as many people as we can and change lives for the better.
As a future-focused, human-centric organisation, we recognise the need to change and adapt to meet the needs of contemporary learners and the future of our planet.
We challenge the status quo and provide innovative postgraduate qualifications and programs accredited by the New Zealand Qualifications Authority.
As our learners have grown, so too have we. We started in 2013 aspiring to upskill the education workforce through the Mind Lab. We then created Tech Futures Lab in 2016 to navigate some of the world's most disruptive technologies. Then we launched Earth Futures Lab to shine a light on what we need to know to protect our environment and our future.
Across our faculties, the Mind Lab, Tech Futures Lab and Earth Futures Lab, anyone from around the world can build essential skills and rise to the opportunities of today and tomorrow.
We have the perfect trio of interconnected faculties developed for busy professionals who want to stay informed, engaged and connected.
We can bring more learning excellence to deliver future-focused learning solutions to the businesses here and around the world.
Because new knowledge and skills can move entire industries forward to the future.
Academy EX is here to deliver the best-in-class education experience to bring fresh, innovative learning to anyone to create impactful futures.
And I'm actually wearing the same dress. I do have other clothing, but anyway. So what is happening today? We'll open with a bit of a karakia, a bit of a welcome as well. And if you haven't had a chance to, please feel free to introduce yourself in the chat, a bit about your name and where you're dialing or zooming in from, and one word around how you're showing up today as well. I will then introduce our wonderful panel speakers, who will then speak really briefly, about 5 to 10 minutes each, around their thoughts around climate tech and innovation. And then we'll open it up for some questions. We've got some guiding questions here, but if you have any burning questions as well, feel free to pop them in the chat. No question is a silly question at Academy EX, so go for gold as well. Okay, let me move. Oh, actually, one more thing before we introduce how the Zoom session is going to work. I'm sure some of you have joined us previously, but for those that haven't, the session will be recorded and sent out via email as a bit of a follow-up with the slide deck as well, and also some upcoming learning opportunities. We'll be using Otter AI to capture the notes in the background as well, just so that when we're doing a bit of a write-up of our wonderful speakers or even the audience say something, incredible words of wisdom, we can capture it verbatim so we're not misquoting you. Please keep your stuff on mute. Again, please use the chat function to engage and ask questions as well. And we're not actually having more time in a fortnight, but just engage in the Q&A at the end, and would love to see your smiling faces if possible. So please turn your video on if you feel comfortable to. So climate tech and innovation for better futures. I really love this whakatauki. Patu ngā rongo ngaro te tangata toitu te whenua. As a man disappears from sight, the land remains. And it feels very timely to move us into introducing you to our wonderful speakers, which I'm sure you've read up about and maybe done a bit of Googling. They are world famous on the internet. But first up, we have POC, Climate Change and Sustainability Consultant at EY. POC works on climate changes, on a range of climate change and sustainability strategies at EY, with the focus on sustainability strategies and modern slavery. He's going to be talking a lot more around social equity, climate justice, and Indigenous solidarity in his part of the talk as well. Next, we have Ian. Ian is the principal and co-founder of The Connective. I really love how he frames them as not just systems thinkers, but also systems doers, as an organization that helps design and implement alternative business models and investment structures that deliver for the people and planet. And last but not least, we have Saskia sharing today, who is the Director of Impact at Proxima Consulting, but also a wonderful friend of Academy EX and our Sustainable Futures Advisor as well, who'll be sharing a little bit about her wealth of expertise and experience. So without further ado, I'm going to hand you over to POC, and you just let me know when you would like to move the slides, POC. But over to you.
Lovely. Hello, everyone. So lovely to meet you all virtually and to be connected via the space. No haina kutupuna engari ko Singapore te ukai poko pok toko ingoa. So I come from a family that just cannot stop moving. We started in China and then we moved to Malaysia, then Singapore, and now New Zealand. So we are, but just acknowledge Mana Whenua and the amazing space that Academy X is providing us today. As you know, I work at EY, but I really like to spend about 5 to 10 minutes looking at some parts of how climate tech can actually, how it intersects with equity and how we design a better world. So next slide, it's okay. So I just want to touch on 3 points. And the first is that how do we actually ensure that our climate response is equitable, and what are we seeing currently? And the second is talking a little bit about EVs and carbon offsets. These are like really big ideas and we're seeing enormous market demand, but I offer a few questions and a little bit of science to tweak in there for you to have a little taste of some of the complexities of these glorious technologies and what are the upsides and downsides. And the last thing is actually, I guess, just a prompt for you to continue to question what is the future of climate tech and innovation. And so if we can go to the next slide, please. So I think the first thing I'd like to talk about is that there is climate inequity, and this is felt actually locally. One of the things that I've been pondering a lot about is, well, the Auckland floods. And it's so interesting when you look at, I'll talk from the first little snippet from the top all the way to the third. And the first one, it says weather in pictures, major deluge of heavy rain. So we know that there was a lot of heavy rain. But when we look closer at who was actually impacted, you start to see articles like the second one in the middle, West Auckland flooding, report finds council failed to keep creek beds clear. And what this means is that our infrastructure isn't spread the same. Different suburbs have different resiliencies. And it was found in the report that West Auckland just didn't have the same resiliency as other areas that caused the flooding to be even more serious and to be even more frequent. And I think this is just one example of how the way we design our cities isn't always the same. Epsom is vastly different from Manurewa. And the question is, should it? And why is it so? And so the third little point, and this is from Climate Risk in an Unfair World by University of Auckland, a really interesting article. It says, existing methods of flood modeling, they're not socially neutral, and they tend to marginalize the most vulnerable people in communities. And sometimes these people don't even know it themselves. So something to think about on how social equity already starts to mingle with our everyday experience of climate, such as a flood. And if you can go to the next slide, please. And so now we talk about EVs and carbon offsets. And you know, I'm as a whole just really optimistic about this future, about how we have renewable technologies. But I think it's also important that if we consider climate tech, we are also introduced to the scientific reality, and how that's sometimes not talked about a lot. And this is so interesting. But one of the paragraphs from and I quote from different reports so that you can in turn take a screenshot and have a look at it later. But this is one of the reports that are coming out, and it's saying that global reserves are not large enough to supply enough metals to build the renewable non-fossil fuels industrial system or satisfy long-term demand in the current system. And if you look at the orange kind of rectangle, that's actually talking about the number of years it takes currently using our technology to get all the copper we need, to get all the lithium that we need, and all the other minerals to fuel this green transformation, this green transition that we're talking about. And some of these are like huge number of years. Like if we look at lithium, it's going to take 9,000 years with our current state of technology to fully transform and usher in a green transition. So I put this not to provide a daunting figure, but to have you to think about, yes, we think that EVs are important, but it also has consequences and strains with different mineral use. And so no one idea is a silver bullet, but how might we accommodate different solutions to fit into that climate future that we're looking towards? And if we go to the next slide, I think talking about EVs provides a question that I put forward. And over here, there's a picture about 30 people getting a coffee. And one of it is just 30 people in a car, and that's urban sprawl where everyone's just spread out and driving is really inevitable. And the second one is sort of like we're providing more dense spaces, urbanism, more people for spaces for people to connect, for people to mingle. But it takes so much less real estate really to get 30 people into a room. I guess the question I ask is, as we plan for, let's say, a technology like electric vehicles, and let's say we want to scale up their adoption, but question to yourself, what future or futures are we actually planning for? Do we really want to keep a car-centric future? And I guess the question is then, how does climate tech look like if we could revolutionize urban design? Would EVs still be needed? So I think I put this as a space for you to continue to expound on your knowledge and expound on possibility, because climate tech, it's all, the sky's the limit, but what is the limit for you and what will you change? And if I could just talk briefly about the next one, the next slide. And that's about carbon credits. And one of the issues with carbon credits, they work really well, but we, you know, there are a few kinks that we have to work through. But one of them is actually on how big corporates are using carbon credits, and they're planting trees on indigenous land. I think and this is something that indigenous peoples actually even raise, and they say, in quote, it's a further act of colonization. And that's a pretty strong statement, but I think it raises a question about the ethics of something like carbon offsetting. Yes, we need to offset carbon, make no mistake. The question is, how will we do it? And who are the people that we are engaging, including indigenous peoples? And what does that process look like that builds trust? So I end on a second last slide, if you go to the next one. And that's about like, I think it's this question on partnership. As we think of the climate tech ecosystem, what partnerships are necessary? Who are we including in the room, and who might we exclude from the room? Who benefits from these carbon credits in society? But as we talk about tech, we often talk about tech as an enabler. So how can tech reduce accessibility issues, be it engaging with indigenous peoples, people with handicaps, or any segment of society that usually doesn't have a say? How can we use tech in a way that democratizes decision making and provides robust stakeholders at the table so that everyone has a say. So again, the thinking of the pros and the cons, because no one idea is a solution, but a robust array of ideas might get us closer to the future we want. And I'll end on a quote, which is my last slide. And that is that short-sightedness may be the greatest threat to humanity. To be human is to understand that we are a part of a long continuum. So let's embrace our cosmic context that lasts tens of thousands of years, respect our origins and our cultural wisdoms and the wisdoms of everyday life, and to hold our future close. So I'll pass it on to the next person, but excited to continue the conversation. Thank you very much.
Amazing. Thanks, Park. Really loved the reiteration around there's no one kind of single idea as a silver bullet, and how might we use tech as an enabler to democratize decision making as well, amongst lots of other wonderful wisdoms and pearls of wisdoms that you shared. And next up we have Ian. Ian, are the lights on there? You ready to go? Okay,
yeah,
great.
Kia ora.
Kia ora.
Thanks, Jade. And yeah, that was pretty interesting from Park. And actually, I guess the questions that you were putting out, Park, I kind of see that while I'm going to not be as colourful as you or as putting out as many provocations, I'm going to talk through a little bit of I guess some of the things that I've been involved in that kind of feed into this. But I think many of the key points that come out are the same. And so, you know, what you've got there in front of you is a single slide. So kia ora koutou, I'm Ian. My background's in systems innovation for climate change and sustainability. So that's the perspective I'm going to be taking when we talk about climate tech and innovation. The term systems or systems change or systems thinking it is being used quite a bit now, which is great that people are starting to use it, but it can mean different things to different people. So when I'm talking about climate innovation and technology needing to work at the systems level, I mean that there needs to be a focus on three things. The first is that solutions that are developed with clear knowledge of a system, not just doing a good project and hoping it changes something. The second area is solutions that provide holistic value, not value in one area and damage or harm in other areas. And the third piece, when we think about solutions, are those that are usually based on collaboration and active participation from all of the key stakeholders within a system. So as I said, I'm going to take through a little bit of a journey of a number of the organizations that I've been involved in over the last 15 years. And I'm going to highlight three that I helped establish and run to support systems innovation. The first two are in Europe, and the third one is in New Zealand. But they all have a common focus on applied innovation, and that's primarily pilots and demonstrators, and almost all of these, and these three organizations represent hundreds and hundreds of projects and pieces of work. And very few of those projects were technology-centric. Technology was involved in a piece of it, but actually the technology sat within, I guess, a wider construct. So I'm going to start back in 2008 in the UK, when a broad range of organizations who were all at the forefront of delivering sustainable cities and sustainable communities came together to ask the question, why is our progress so slow? So there were lots of conversations and a few workshops, and at the end of all of that, the conclusion was we've got limited progress on delivering sustainable cities and communities because our cities and communities are complex systems or complex systems of systems. And so if we're just looking at solutions at one part and not understanding the whole or bringing forward solutions that understand the whole, then we're not going to be achieving. And so why is that not happening? That's not happening primarily because it requires a broad range of organizations and people to be able to collaborate together in ways that aren't natural for us to collaborate. So on the back of that, in 2009, about 20 of these organizations established the Institute for Sustainability as an independent and trusted entity to support systems innovation for pilots and demonstrators. These organizations included some of the world's leading tech companies such as Siemens and IBM, and some of the leading technical universities such as Imperial College and University College London. In our first 5 years at the Institute for Sustainability, we secured funding for about $65 million worth of these pilots and demonstrators. And one of the big ones, I guess, was the Smart Sustainable Districts, which was a program with 6 large-scale developments in different European cities, which all demonstrated a very broad range of smart, sustainable innovations. But the overarching goal was looking at ways to be able to deliver at that, coming back to how we design communities, how we design our cities and our towns. And so the objective here was to look at how we can deliver that with a 4-fold increase in resource efficiency. That is a quarter of the resource input into developing a community or a district or a city. And they did this by bringing in the best brains in design, materials, and technology, and having all the key stakeholders around the table in each of these 6 cities. And they included designers, developers, utility companies, but they also had the local authorities and the policymakers and really diverse community groups as well to make sure that what was being developed and how it was being shaped represented, all of these perspectives, and we're going to be being able to support the whole. And around the same time that the Institute for Sustainability was being set up, the European Commission or the European government reached the same conclusion on climate change. That is that the market was only going to deliver so much in terms of climate solutions, because many of the solutions that we need in climate change are system solutions. So Climate KIC, KIC, Knowledge and Innovation Community, was created in 2010. And I was on the board for the first 5 years and helped with the setup of it and chaired the focus on cities, climate solutions for cities. And then I was chief exec for the last couple of years before I came home to New Zealand in 2017. And at that point, Climate KIC had 18 offices across Europe. We had 220 partners across research, academia, major corporates, public sector, both at the national level and at city levels, but also NGOs and social landlords and people like that coming together to collaborate. And in 2017, the KIC had the largest network of clean tech, green tech incubators and accelerators in the world. And we brought in some expensive consultants, not EY-POC, to do an evaluation of, I guess, how much impact that we'd have. And they calculated that we'd delivered more than $2 billion worth of climate action over the first 5 years. So quite big, a lot of stuff, but really mixing up with, huge multinationals working with community groups and social landlords. Just going to touch on one of the KIC projects, just to, I guess, as it relates to this this discussion, which was focused on biofuels for aviation. The project was led by KLM, the Dutch airline, and Schiphol Airport in Amsterdam, one of the largest airports in the world. And they were working with leading researchers, startups and corporates on the biofuel technologies, but they ended up putting most of their focus on how to create local value chains, because the research and the analysis had showed that a significant part of the cost, both financial and emissions-based, came from the transportation through each step of the value chain for the biofuels. So their project then primarily focused on how they could create a local integrated value chain close to the end users at Schiphol Airport. In 2019, I then came back to New Zealand, and in 2019, we established the Connective, Jay kind of mentioned at the beginning, and we support organizations and people looking to evolve business as usual in New Zealand and the South Pacific, whether that be business models or economic models, or really just creating different ways of doing things. And related again to, I guess, part of what POC was saying, we're currently leading a project that's looking at forestry models that work best for New Zealand as part of the Forestry and Wood Products Industry Transformation Plan. So to transform an industry, and we clearly do need to transform our forestry industry in New Zealand, as shown over the last 6 months or so. But to be able to transform something, we need to understand the system and why our current approaches or our current models they actually deliver limited financial value and limited wider value for natural environments and communities. So we think there, and the work, I guess, as we're taking it forward, is looking at nature-based solutions that look at the full breadth of value that can be created through regenerative practice that work with and nurture nature. So tech plays a part in this, but it's not the bigger part. The bigger part is really saying, how can we work better with nature and think about things at a holistic level. So I guess in summary, what you've got there in front of you is, I think it's essential that we utilize a systems lens for our approach to climate innovation and technology, which means 3 things. The first one, as it says there, ensuring climate innovation and technology work at the systems level, not in a silo. Second one is having a holistic understanding of what we value and what we're aiming for. So there's no point, it's pretty difficult to figure out what you should be doing or where you want to be focusing if you're not clear about what the objective is and what we're aiming for. And then the third piece, as we think about the innovation as it relates to innovation and technology, it's important that we utilize a systems lens for those solutions, and those solutions need to be developed with a clear understanding or clear knowledge of the system, which includes understanding interdependencies and which critical points either block or enable value creation or systems change. The solutions need to provide holistic value, not value in one area and causing pain or something negative in other areas, or for one part of society getting a lot of value and other parts of society being worse off. And the third thing, when we think about systems innovation, the type of solutions we need are increasingly going to be those that require collaboration and active participation from the full diverse group of stakeholders within the systems that we're working at. And with that, I'll pass back and on to Saskia. Kia ora.
Kia ora, Ian. Thank you for sharing your wealth of expertise and experience in establishing lots of different system innovation mahi as well. I love what you said around, moving from climate, all climate solutions should be system solutions. And I guess more recently, you're focusing in on nature-based solutions as well, which I'm sure we'll hear a bit more about. There's some wonderful chat going on in the chat. I won't be able to keep abreast of it, but towards the end, I'll capture any kind of questions, but feel free to respond to them as experts in the room, Ian, POC, and Saskia, if you like. But next up, we have the wonderful Saskia. Over to you, Saskia.
Pena koutou katoa, e mihi ana ki te mana whenua. I whana mai aho iho rana, ko kai pātiki taku ka inga i naiane, ko hei tauiwi aho, ko Saskia Varaz taku ingoa, no reira, tēnā koutou katoa. Thank you, Jade, for the introduction before. As I said, I am Saskia Varaz. I am the Director of Impact at Proxima Consulting, and I am the Sustainable Futures Advisor at Academy X. And I actually also have another hat, well, 2 other hats really, which is I run a global not-for-profit Match for Action to accelerate social impact and to bring good causes and good people together. And as part of that, crowd doing, which uses citizen science really to close social innovation gaps. And all of that linked together to what we are talking about here today. And everything I do is interconnected. So if you want to bring up the next slide, Jana, thank you. So I only have one slide because I think it is more important to have interactive discussions and see what questions you have and how we can collectively build up our knowledge around climate, technology, innovation, and everything around it, because we are living in a time in humanity that is not certain, and it still requires a lot of answers to be uncovered. And what I wanted to bring up here is that we need to uncover those answers as if we are indeed working in gardens of abundance. We really need to look at it from an optimistic perspective. We are all gardeners in this landscape, and we can create solutions that will address the issues that both POC and Ian brought up very well. And the things that we are facing, we need to do that together. As both of those also pointed out, collaboration is incredibly important. And how do we indeed ensure that those that haven't been heard in the last many hundred years because of our Western mindsets are going to be part of this transition that is required? And innovation and technology both are very old words. And I just, on this slide, you can see a little bit about where the words come from. But why I am really excited about both innovation and technology is because of what they really mean, and because of the optimism it brings, in my opinion, to where we can get to, in the sense that innovation can mean restoration and renewal, and technology in many languages around the world has got a link to the word technology that means something like to weave and to fabricate and to change something new. It doesn't have to mean digital technology or AI or virtual technology. It means creating something new in a different way. And we know that we have to create things in a different way because we are currently, in the ways that we are operating in Western societies mainly, crushing our beautiful planet, and that is hurting us, and that is hurting everybody else. And it's anybody that cares, and I think most people actually do care, but they're just taken up in this current system and cannot get out of it. So one of the things I do, and through all of the hats that I wear, is indeed work with people on mindsets and work to try and explore how we can think about things differently, and really take people into impact thinking, and how our technology is impacting and impacted by the ways that we design them. And I always get hope also from that design thinking approach. In a way, I mean, design thinking in its pure, well, I'm not talking about it with a pure definition, but if you think about the fact that consumerism and the way that currently is employed in our system is designed by us in the way that it currently works. That system is designed by the people in power that were in power after World War II, especially in the States, to think this is how we're going to rebuild our economies after the war. Now, if we take that approach and think about it, if we work together and know what we're aiming for, which is what POC referred to as well, like we need to have a common purpose to make this an equal and just and regenerative way of designing the solutions that we are working on, then we can, because we just need to bring our minds together and learn critical thinking, and learn that we can let go of what we currently have, and what we have in front of us is way more beautiful than what we can imagine and what we currently have, because it will be more equal, because we will actually save the oceans and stop the extinction that we're currently facing if we do this together and if we listen to each other as part of that. So I would love to see how we can do this together and what questions you have as part of that. And the other thing that I wanted to mention, as part of my citizen science work with Match Fraction and Crowddoing, my not-for-profits, one of the things that always comes up is there are so many incredible solutions already out there, so many community, indigenous, and other ways of creating solutions in a far more equitable way than the big solutions that are being promoted. But there is so much grassroots here, also here in Aotearoa, New Zealand, the things that we hear about as part of our courses, as part of Leading Change for Good, and the things that are happening are out there, and we need to give them voice, and we need to bring them together and create a much bigger wave of change and help each other to actually do that, and create that innovation and technology together that creates those changes that we want to see. So with that, I'll hand back to Jade.
Love that, Saskia. Co-creating gardens of abundance. And I didn't actually realize the origins of innovation, meaning restoration and renewal. I probably should. But love what you talked about, interconnected systems. We've had lots of these conversations, and how you're wanting to move this into more of an interactive discussion and conversation, which there's actually lots of wonderful chat in here as well, almost like mini essays. So maybe we'll jump into one of the questions. And again, friendly reminder, if you have any other questions, pop them in the chat as well, and we'll get to them very, very shortly. But yeah, just would love to have a bit of a discussion, maybe with the first question around the intersection of climate tech innovation. And I mean, it sounds like you're all moving, not moving away from tech, but tech being an enabler and moving into more systems-based and holistic-based work. But what actually inspired you or drew you into this climate innovation world or work in the first place? Maybe we'll start off with you, Saskia, and then we'll go Pop and then Ian, because that's how you're on my screen.
All right, Jade. Well, as I said, I'm originally from the Netherlands, and as part of living there, you always knew that most part of that country was actually under sea level. And so from whenever I can imagine, and I'm conscious, I knew that it was amazing that the technology that was existing for us to be able to even live there was absolutely incredible. And I've always felt inspired by that. And also my dad was a geography teacher and taught me and my siblings everything about the land and the impacts of that what were already happening at that point in time, of pollution and the bad side, the dirty side of technology and that sort of thing as part of geography. And on the other hand, also was always, and I guess that's also a privilege of growing up in the Netherlands, and the way that the educational system was work there is that it really taught me the love of learning and the love for new stuff. And I just absolutely love change and innovation and seeing what good it can bring, as long as you have a really good value system around that. So that's really what initially drew me into this work, and then through the value systems of my parents and grandparents to really protect the lands that we live on.
Beautiful. Sounds like your love for it came from a young age, and definitely heavily influenced by family as well. Oh, what about you? What inspired you or drew you to this mahi in the first place?
I think it's so interesting, and I really agree with Saskia when she mentioned about how innovation is also about creating something new in a different way that's not been thought of before. I think when we think of innovation and we think of even like technology, by default in our world, it has to be digital. But I think it's also expounding and challenging that boundary. Like innovation can be conceptual. It could be, for example, I don't know, like a crazy idea is like universal basic income. That's an innovative idea. We can debate whether it's right or wrong for society, whether it has its time in our society, but by default, because it strays away from dominant thought, it has strains of innovation attached to it. So I think, like it's really important that we understand. I think we need, and when we apply this to a climate context, what I'm really reflecting is it's so important that we lean on expertise by IPCC, by really renowned and trusted scientific bodies, but it's also realizing that science is but one singular reference point, and I would even challenge that there are many ways that we look at innovation in climate. Like we look at it through science, but I think another dominant theme that we're seeing in the chat is storytelling. One of the things about science is that science cannot always speak to the heart. Maybe for a select group. I grew up with I grew up with the humanities, and then I later did accounting, so I have a bit of theater in me. And storytelling has evolved across the ages and been timeless. And even if we look at indigenous cultures, a lot of oratorical cultures have kept their values because they've told stories. Stories by nature in our brains are something we relate to. So why must climate be so stern, be so rigid, when it can be imaginative? I think having playfulness in something doesn't actually mean it's worth any less attention. And in truth, it actually instills you to remember it more. So I think it's expounding on what the parameters of innovation are. And obviously there are digital innovations, and those cannot be discounted. They have their place as well. But perhaps to set the frame within this discussion, I think it's worthy that we think of it through storytelling, and we think of it as innovation is more than digital. Welcome any thoughts or challenges in that.
Love that. Ian, thoughts or challenges or inspiration?
Yeah, no, I'm gonna build off that actually, and I too was looking at the chat and thinking, let's get into behavior and culture, because for me it's 100%. That is the focus. That has to be the primary focus. But actually, the question you just asked us, Jade, for me actually can feed into that, because I didn't get into climate innovation because I wanted to save the world, and clearly that's a good thing to be doing. I got into it because it was so obvious that climate change meant that, the way that we do things had to fundamentally change. And so if they're going to fundamentally change because of climate change, or the way that we were, using resources and polluting the planet, then it gave us an opportunity to be able to change other things, right? So things that I was at that time much more, and still are, I guess, energized and exercised by, like, inequity and rising inequality and the depletion of Earth's biodiversity, those things. And so that's why I got into climate change, and I've been in it for quite a long time now, because I genuinely believe we have to change because of climate change. And if we're going to change business models and economic models and ways of doing things, let's not just look at that one thing. Let's look at multiple things that we can, make everything a whole lot better. So I think that really does feed into the, how we describe it and how we think about culture and behavior. And I think hopefully if we can go through this conversation on the culture behavior stuff, then it'd be good to talk about it at a global level, but we should talk about it at a New Zealand level as well, because New Zealand's culture, from the stuff that I've been doing in Europe for 20 odd years, which is all about collaboration, New Zealand isn't great at collaborating, with different organizations together or across different sectors and stuff as well. So it'd be great to sort of think about behaviors, culture, and how we get people engaged in that kind of stuff as well.
And it's I just want to add on briefly to Ian. On one of our, like one of our business engagements, one of the sort of like rituals or things that we did, and this is for context, it's a museum client, so we knew they were a bit more out there. But we actually said, you want to create a sustainability strategy that's a bit out of the ordinary, bring an item or bring an artifact that speaks to you. And people would bring stuff like a shell, or like, or they bring something that spoke to them, or like a piece of greenstone. But what was significant was the stories that were attached to it. And from the stories, we don't listen to stories for the content always. We also listen for the commonality we share with storytelling and the values that are synonymous within us. That is how we link between people. That's why, like, even with COVID, like the narrative of a team of 5 million kind of speaks to us in a way. It's about understanding behavior on a larger level. And I think this is something that we actually haven't given due consideration for, because changing climate action or climate shift, like in our policies and whatever we do, climate action is deeply political. And if anything, this is a social and political issue rather than an environmental one. We are experiencing it from an environmental level, but what the barriers are social and political.
And cultural as well, I'm hearing across the board. This brings us, Ian, you mentioned this a little bit around, and we've had conversations around the challenges of collaboration and why, in Aotearoa New Zealand, we tend to not as collaborate as freely as maybe some other cultures as well. What do you, and apart from collaboration, or maybe we can drill down into why you think collaboration is a challenge here in Aotearoa New Zealand, and maybe any other challenges that you feel we might have around this topic?
I think it comes down to culture again, and behavior. Yeah, Jade. Yeah, no, I genuinely do. I think, and again, I've been involved in I guess, deep collaborations on innovation, on new things, on change and stuff, and then coming home to New Zealand after such a long time away and starting to see this not just in the climate space, but actually in all spaces. So I'm on a few boards, as you mentioned before. So I'm on the board of Auckland Foundation. Actually, I'm the chair, and we set up a fund on the back of the floods, right? Because actually the impact on the communities in Auckland it hasn't been seen like this before. But even in the charitable space, New Zealand has the second largest number of charities per capita in the world. Because I think it's the same cultural thing. We kind of feel like, the number 8 piece of wire, right? Is we can do it. We've got this. We can, which is a great thing, that we don't like sit back and wait for others to do it. We're going to do it ourselves. But I think it holds us back when it comes to needing in these spaces where we really need to collaborate. And I saw there was a message pop up, I think, asking about are there other countries that are better at this? Yeah, there are. So I mentioned when I was talking about a few of the different projects that we've been involved in, the Smart Sustainable Districts project had 6 large-scale district projects in different cities. And so the one in London was the Olympic Park, and it was like the transition to the Olympic Park. So we were working with them around how that worked, and we had all the key players. There was one in Berlin, there was one in Paris, there was one like at different places. The one in London, which I had the most to do with, but my organisation, we kind of ran the whole thing. It took about 12 months before all of the key players got to a level of trust where they could start to be really open and start to think differently around how they did things. From the multinationals working with social landlords and community groups and stuff. The very first meeting I went to in Malmö in Sweden, they had all of the key people around a table, and straight away, boom, into it. It was just, it's natural for the Scandinavian cultures to collaborate. And I was shocked. It was, we had the chief exec of the national energy company. In fact, it was a German energy company that, was the main energy provider in Malmö, talking to, person who was, running one of the local community groups or something. And they were just got to it. Whereas in other cultures, in the British culture, you know, people were kind of used to coming in, and if you work for a big organization, whether it be, you know, like the mayor's office, or you work for a multinational, or you work for a big shiny university, you come in and think, you know, well, we know best, we can tell everybody else what to do.
Yeah,
It's
so
a
fascinating.
really
Saskia,
sorry.
any thoughts on from you around collaboration challenges, anything?
Yeah, thank you. I was just going to say, I always call myself a radical collaborator, and it really, to me, is about change. Again, what I said before, it's about changing mindsets. Like we've learned in our Western educational systems, really, we learn everything about competition, and every time you start talking about business and that sort of thing, one of the first exercises you have to do is about how can we push others out of the market? Where are we the best? And let's not share anything. Let's just come up with something better, sort of thing. Where, to me, indeed, with our big challenges that we face, it is indeed about how can we find the things that we have in common and create that, and understand that there is an abundance. I mean, there is so much change that we have to make, that when you ask where are the big opportunities, this is where the big opportunities are. There is space for everyone to find purpose and to actually help create a much better place for all of us and our generations, and to come after us, including nature as well. So the radical collaboration exercises that we do within different places that I work is all about purpose. It's what POC referred to as well. It's all about finding those common values and having a common purpose, and having somebody as a sort of facilitator, I suppose, unless it works in once it starts working, is to actually continuously point back to that purpose. So when one of the indigenous theories that I'm not sure if you even can call it a theory, but like wayfinding leadership, where you actually know the direction you're going and continuously adjust the trajectory based on looking at what's happening around you, based on who's going to be the best leader in this space, and at this point in time, what are the stars telling us, and taking that as a metaphor. But it is indeed all about finding where we have things in common and should be working together to accelerate all of us. And there is space for all of us within that. So we with Crowd Doing, we've brought together, for instance, as an example, with that sort of philosophy, we've brought together 40 different organizations, startups, as well as more existing organizations around wildfire prevention, people that would never have thought about working together. And this is in an American Silicon Valley sort of space where people are incredibly individual, incredibly out there still for how can I make a quick buck? But at the same time, there is a side of them, because they've jumped into wildfire prevention as an area that they do care about the cause. So as long as you can bring that out of them and sort of bring that together and say, well, actually, there is a lot of benefit about doing this together. You can prevent a lot more wildfire if you do this together. And it's hard, but it does work. Like it's not an easy initial and immediate process, but it can work. It just requires a different mindset.
I love the idea of radical collaboration, Saskia. We had lots of conversations about this. I'm curious, POC, and it sounds like you work with a whole range of different clients, both from business, both from the public and private sector. Has there ever been an opportunity to bring all those people into the same room to co-create what system level strategies might look like for them? Is collaboration a thing for someone like EY? Would you consider collaborating with the other big four around some of these goals? And I don't know whether you can speak to that or not. Maybe it's a
You're
bit
putting
meta.
me,
Feel free-
you're
feel
putting me
free
in
to
a
not
very
comment.
mischievous territory. Let's see how far we can push the envelope. You know, I actually, just a quick note on what Saskia and Ian have been talking about. I often wonder if the reason why we're hesitant to collaborate, if it's somehow linked to even our physical infrastructure. Like I am constantly thinking about how Auckland is incredibly car dependent. I mean, I come from Singapore. I could get everywhere via public transport, and suddenly my reality was I had to learn how to drive. I was estranged from everyone, and I was comparing my experience in university, which was just a few years ago, and how everyone was in the same ecosystem within literally the same 2 kilometers, and they could walk around and just chat up each other. And those bonds compared to like after you enter into workplace and your social relationships increase in distance, both literally because you're further out in different suburbs, but in a sense imposing almost a figurative sort of distance. And I question that because it does feel like there is I wonder if there's literature on this. It's something I'm continuously very curious about as we design cities. There are examples though on the big question when it comes to collaboration, and I think one of the examples you would that I think about is Toitu Tahua, and that's the Center of Sustainable Finance, and that really kind of united banks with a common vision of financing green infrastructure. And greening the finance system as a whole, and it was about finding a common vision and pushing it towards that. However, I do like, I guess I think that's very important. We need to continue to push that. But I do see that I do question if we need more connectors in our ecosystem, and actually within the climate tech ecosystem. What we often see is that, well, as climate tech startups are starting to scale, you have to have an MVP, you have to have a viable product, you have to work towards, it's almost like refining everything to a singular arrow, a very very strong, deadly arrow that gets the bullseye. But the question then is, well, what is the bigger ecosystem of change that we're working towards? And we are an ecosystem. Something that I do has a butterfly effect somewhere else down the road. Something that a bank decides to do has impact on communities down the line. And so I think even within the climate tech ecosystem, like it's this question of, can we have more connectors in this space? Like, and I think like, and also like one of the struggles that we are currently seeing right now is this almost this sense of carbon tunnel vision within the climate discussion, because there is no like, it's great if we hit a 1.5 degree world, but what happens if we've lost our bees? We've essentially lost 80% of our produce on our shelves, and how does this then combine with like, and again, it's like, what if we have a 1.5 degree future, but the only people who are alive are the rich, and there is no consideration for social equity? It's the question is, how do we provide space for both people who are deep specialists to solve specific problems, but also people who establish vision and connect them? I think that's a big challenge. And it's something that, to be honest, I think our capitalist system struggles to figure out, because we've grown into such a specialized system like this globalization. People just specialize into different industries. How then do we reconfigure that? I lay that out as a question as much as a challenge, because I think it's an incredibly important thing to think about right now.
How do we reconfigure capitalism? Is that what you was the question? That's a big one.
How do we reconfigure the incentives of our system so that we naturally start collaborating where there is strong impetus to collaborate, because it's innate in us. And if we look at capitalism, like, well, I don't claim to be an expert on capitalism, but before World War II, we had strong characteristics of a market-based economy where there was a fair degree of bartering and trade. There were elements of fairness. Things started to unravel a little bit more after World War II when we needed material well-being and we started to espouse growth as our Bible. Growth has its place, but then there are now questions of, like GDP measures how much we produce. It doesn't measure who consumes and who doesn't have food on the table. It doesn't measure who has access and who doesn't have access. It only tells you one story. The question is, what are all the other parts of the story that we're not telling? So when I mean reconfiguring, that's perhaps one way to look at it.
Okay, thanks, Pat. And going back to what you said right at the beginning was, what future or futures are we actually planning for as well? I'm just going to see if there's any questions in the chat as well.
Hey, Jade,
Yes.
I just wonder whether we can continue the thread that
yeah, of course,
that Bruce and Murray have kind of like put out in the chat, right? When we're talking about storytelling, Pop, what you were talking about then about, can we have, a vision or a North Star or something at which actually everybody gets in behind. I think that's part of this dialogue and the culture thing and the collaboration. But to me, there's no question that culture and behaviors is the most important thing. From all this tech stuff I've been involved in, the big change comes where you can create the culture. And so the organizations that I talked about, Institute of Sustainability and Climate Kick, and there are others that do this, they effectively created a space where people could come in and different organizations could collaborate and work in a different way, in a different culture from what they would normally do, right? So I think part of our challenge here is how can we nudge our culture in Aotearoa New Zealand? How can we get people behind this and see this? And so I think, what's the North Star that we're aiming for is a big thing, and is there a way that we can get that? But I think there are other things that we can do. I'd love to hear from other people actually, because I thought the dialogue was pretty cool, pretty rich.
Yes, Bruce, are you still there?
I am.
Oh yeah, would you like to speak to your wonderful points?
As I said in the chat, it seems to me, from my experience of doing all kinds of campaigns here in Canada and so on, that it needs some professional communications people. For example, I'd give $500 million to Ogilvy and Mather in New York, just as the New Zealand police have given millions to their advertising specialists. They're experts in communication. They're doing beautiful ads. The one that says just a little one today, that they would have spent hours figuring that idea out, and it moved a lot of people and it probably saved a lot of lives. So there's already precedence in warning in a good way. Now, I think that it needs to be stepped up. And they would do things like, for example, do a movie of somebody like me digging a tornado shelter in my backyard, which I'm thinking of doing. And that would jar a lot of people because they think, he's kidding, isn't he? Then they think Levin is near Palmerston North. It's totally reasonable that this guy would dig a shelter. They'd talk to their neighbours, their wives, their families over dinner. That's the kind of thing that the professional media people do. They got women to smoke. Women didn't want to smoke, but the media people in New York got them to smoke by making women in the front row of the suffragettes marching smoking. So this is the kind of expertise. I'm not saying it's a good thing. I'm saying they are experts in that. I think that the job has already been done of articulating the credibility of climate change and even the mitigations. I went to a meeting last week of the Climate Change Commission. They were doing a consultation up at Massey University. There was not much talk about media, but it's because I think they see themselves as engineers and meteorologists and technical and what I call physicals experts, but they don't see the whole industry of communications as being the next tool they have to wield. Now, they might think, well, I'm out of a job now, but they're not, because they would be the subject matter expert advising these people. And the key thing, I'll be quiet now and let other people give their ideas, but the key thing is to get people excited by the possibility of that. So perhaps you could approach some of the really good media people, even the ones who are at the moment doing the police ads, and say, If we were to get funding from the government or the ETS, get money from the ETS as this being a high priority, what would you do? Give us a sales pitch, give us a plan so we can go to the Minister for Climate and we can go to the media and we're saying, folks, you like the police ads because they're helping you be safe on the roads. We are going to spend $1 billion globally to do this out of the ETS and out of our own government tax to do this. So then this means you're going to the communications company and they sit around the table on Friday afternoon and they brainstorm, and they're very clever people. They come up with ideas and ideas and ideas, and they shave them up and fix them up, and then they go live with them, $100,000 a minute, and it goes out there and people change. That's what I think we need. I think we've done the job of the physicals, that is the meteorology, the transport intervention. We know that stuff. It's been done. We can stop doing that altogether and get on, I think, with the persuasion done professionally by people that really know what they're doing. That's my position.
Yeah, great position. Used to come from a comms background, well, still come from a comms background, so completely agree with you. There's no point creating a whole bunch of mahi and not actually effectively communicating it to the wider public. Murray, you've got some wonderful, it's obviously election year. I'd love for you to speak to your point around. Yeah,
I have to confess to Bruce that I've just come out of 25 years working in advertising agencies, but I'm now a consultant, and so I have some sympathy for that view. Although, and I think even the World Economic Forum in 2014 said we actually have a communication issue around sustainability, largely because we tend to talk in abstract nouns, and human beings don't relate to abstractions very well. They like specifics and they like emotion, and so I think there is huge opportunity to use the power of storytelling to actually motivate and engage people. But I also think part of the issue is that our media tend to focus on the negative, and that's understandable for commercial reasons. But even a masthead like The Guardian, they at least took the step of saying we're going to report on climate change in order to signal that it's a major issue that is of public interest, and the journalists, the Fourth Estate, has a responsibility to investigate it. I don't see that in the New Zealand landscape. And funnily enough, one of my clients used to be TVNZ. I used to say to them, why don't you take a stand on this? Why don't you actually say we are going to incorporate sustained environmental coverage into our editorial position? And Stuff have done something quite similar. So I was just raising that in the chat. But my other question was the extent to which this is inherently political and it gets kicked around like a bit of a football, when it really needs to be a bipartisan effort, and that the biggest act of leadership from our political class would be actually to say, you know what, let's stop arguing with the ref and arguing about the rules and who's right and the ideology. What kind of a country do we want to be given these undeniable forces happening around us, and how do we actually start a much more bipartisan conversation about that? And that's a question because it sounds naive when you say it, but why shouldn't it be something that we can achieve?
Who would you get around a table? Let's say we employed you we'll give you $1 billion, okay? You're the first one.
Don't do that, Bruce.
You've got $1 billion right now, and you're going to coordinate it. Who are your comrades? Now, you'll get James Shaw, there are vested interests who would join you. The advertising people, you'd give half of your billion to them. So you say, I've got $500 million here. Let's pretend I've got $500 million. What would you be able to do? Give me a marketing plan for it. I'm not going to pay you anything now. This is just marketing. What are you going to do? What I'm saying is,
theoretical.
Who do you gather with you? In whose interest is it to join you in this proposal to the government and to the ETS? They're going to put $1 billion into the communications message. Who are your allies?
Honestly, I don't think this is the right question. I think the question is, how do we get the nation to say this is what we want, right? How do we get the nation to say that, these are the things we don't want? And I just see Saskia saying we've got to focus on the things we do want. I truly believe that this is a positive thing. This is an opportunity thing. So we can frame it as an opportunity which we all get behind. Then Then we bring in Murray and his mates to come and make the cuts.
I wouldn't bring in too many of them. I'd just bring in the right ones. And I think the point is, Bruce, it's got to be a marketing plan.
Yeah.
Not even a marketing plan, but it's got to be an operational plan that has communications as part of it. It's not just a nice ad campaign that makes us all feel good like Loyal back in the day. But it should model the behaviours we expect to see. Ian, to your point about modelling New Zealand as a collaborative enterprise, taking on challenges is an identity we need to start telling ourselves. That's who we are and what we do and who we want to become. There is a role for that. Absolutely.
What I'm suggesting is, it's kind of like pulling yourself up by your bootstraps. At the moment, there's not enough motivation to do a massive, effective communications campaign. The reason I picked on you, Murray, was because you understand advertising a bit, but we can't expect the politicians, who are just more or less a mirror image of the sentiment of the public, we can't expect them to pull themselves up by their own bootstraps. But you can expect an advertising agency offered a very nice project. You can expect them to be motivated. Now, they've got to consider their other customers and whether they tread on toes. But what I'm saying is, it's got to start from people who are motivated for selfish reasons.
I'm going to challenge you on that one, Bruce. Yeah, it's having come from a comms and marketing advertising agency background and having a partner that is a creative director as well. I don't know if the incentives are always aligned in the most positive ways. I probably tautoko and agree with Saskia around grassroots co-creation, and then actually having a layer of comms strategy that comes over the top. I think there's an element of actually, I'm not the expert here, but bringing together the wider society to have this conversation, have those courageous discussions as well. And obviously with a communication element too, but there is an element of really strategic community engagement across the system, whether it be across all the government agencies, whether it be across all the different 97,000 community organisations that we have across Aotearoa, whether it be across the different parties as well, to be able to create that system level change. I will stop on my rant show. You've had lots of wonderful thoughts and links in there as well. And lots of questions. Did you want to just pick one of those questions for POC in particular? I don't want to put you on the spot. No,
I did reply to
you did reply
to some parts of what show was talking in terms of the electric grid, the expected demand, the upcoming technologies that we can sort of like see being utilized in this space. It's ripe for disruption. Like this sort of, I feel so many feelings from this conversation we're having. Like because there are deep incentives in, one example is the advertising industry, but even within social media, like we know that if, like, I think there was research that was trying to figure out how tweets were viral, and it turns out that controversial content is about 20% more viral than if you were sharing a photo of a bird flying around on a beautiful day. If you had something that was dangerous, so we've sort of like we've really defaulted to our biology, which hasn't really evolved very well across the tens of thousands of years. We've just hacked into our biology for the gain of a select few in this system. It's deeply unfortunate. I have a lot of feelings about this. I monitor what we're doing in the regulatory space when it comes to social media, when it comes to how we are incentivizing these systems. What I see is that, well, this is what happens when the goal of everything is growth. Like if everything is growth, you see look at how ChatGPT has shifted its stance from being a non-profit organization to being a for-profit organization. And it's because there is you know, their shareholder expectation. You have to be profit making, but it's this central idea that we don't have enough when we clearly do. I often ponder, how do we actually convey that we have enough for everyone's need, but not enough for everyone's greed? Ultimately, this is addressing a very delicate power dynamic. But you know, like, to those who hold on to their power, no one's retirement is going to be peaceful in an age of climate disruption, regardless of the generation of that you're in. And it's always like, I hate to kind of like talk about this point, you know, like that, and we have to almost like talk about it in a heavier note, but I guess that's true. You know, like, it strains me. It strains me to think of this. And it's, yeah.
But does growth to you mean more wealth, or can growth be more and better, especially ecologically? Can't we have growth in the sense that it is more of better? I think we'll never get away from growth. I just think we need good growth.
Well, I guess that's kind of like what the dominant ideology of the green growth movement that we're seeing now, especially in the private sector. That's what we're pushing for pretty aggressively. But as I've talked about with EVs, and as I've talked about with carbon credits, very well-intentioned ideas, when supported and underpinned by the idea of a free market and by growth, lead to systems of exploitation elsewhere. Like, we can say that EVs are an amazing form of green growth, but they also fuel a form of slave trade in the in the DRC in Africa. So it's a reevaluation of that assumption. And it's very curious that you mentioned it, because at the same time, the EU has just held the Beyond Growth conference, where they invited, and it went all the way to the EU Commission. You have academics, you have young people in the room, you have entrepreneurs, all looking at what it means to be beyond, like, what does post-growth look like? Like, for example, for me, what if I stopped looking at the bottom line all the time in my day job, and I actually was just focused on solving it? Like, how would that shift? What would that be different? Our hands are tied, even in the private sector, to do what we need to do because of parameters of growth. So I question that. Yeah.
Great question as well. There is a wonderful, I think, Oxford panel discussion between Kate Raworth, who was facilitating, and two other key people that their name escapes me, but was talking about the pros and cons of green growth versus degrowth, which I will see if I can find a link and share with you in the follow-up email as well. I'm really conscious of time, and I just thought I'd take this opportunity to share a few learning opportunities with you. This has been such a rich discussion, and thank you so much, Bruce and Murray and Joe and everyone else that's made comments as well. Some great suggestions in the chat. But I'll share a few of our upcoming learning opportunities. If you're interested in this, there's a few other panel discussions that will also be running as well. And then I'm going to hand back to POC, Ian and Saskia with some final words or wisdom that you would like to leave with us today. And then we'll close with a karakia and send you on your way, because just mindful, it is probably dinner time. So bear with me while I do a bit of a sales pitch. Some upcoming learning opportunities at Academy EX. We love hosting panel discussions, but we'll actually have a wonderful info session next week, hosted by Megs and our wonderful program lead, Fiona Pond, who I think was on the chat earlier today. We also have our deep dive learning lunches as well, which happen monthly. We've got a wonderful man called John Humphreys that's going to be talking about satellites and space and something quite different. And yeah, it will be really fascinating in its own way. And we've got a whole range of Tech Futures and executive workshops and masterclasses that are coming up. So please watch this space. As mentioned, there's a whole range of different learning programs. More specifically in regards to Earth Futures Lab, we have our Connected Environments and Leading Beyond Sustainability, which we have the wonderful Saskia leading as well as a microcred, and Learning Solutions with Anna and Partners Lounge. So these are our LMS and content creation where we partner with businesses around their learning needs. And actually on the theme of microcreds as well, Motivation May. Jana, do you want to speak about this? Because I feel like they've heard my voice quite a lot. Jana is our wonderful marketing lead around this.
Sure, there's a lot of text on the screen, but I'll keep it brief with you guys. In short, we're running an amazing new scholarship throughout the month of May. We use the code Motivation May. We're giving away 460 micro-credentials across the board. So we got 7 range from disruptive technology to leading beyond sustainability, our wonderful micro-credential that Saskia heads up. So if you're interested, we can pop a link to that in the follow-up email tomorrow as well. But you can sign up for any intake throughout the year, but end of May is when you got to do it by if you want to take up the opportunity.
Order. Thank you, Jana. And yeah, final words of wisdom. I mean, yeah, you can share what's next for you. You can share what you're working on. Yeah, any final concluding thoughts? And I think you popped a few things in the chat as well. But Saskia, do you want to go first? Because you had some wonderful thoughts there.
Thanks, Jay. Yeah, I absolutely love the discussion, and I think we need to be a lot braver with how we think generally, and we really need to really push beyond the boundaries to come up with what we sort of talked about today, innovation in the way that we cannot hold on to how we have currently. We cannot go back to how we have created our current world. Like I said, I'd be very worried if we are going to use an advertising agency to solve a climate crisis to start with. I mean, I totally agree that it is part communications, obviously, storytelling, obviously, they're all part of what we need to do, but we need to really challenge our thinking and shift our minds and look to indigenous cultures and look at how they interact with nature, how that is built in, how we have stepped on some of the knowledge that they do hold, and really try and listen first before we start telling them how it actually is done. Yeah, I'd love to, I mean, recommend people, I mean, there is a lot of information out there, and it is hard sometimes to weed through it. But I mean, I don't have any specific people that I would suggest, but I would definitely point towards Indigenous leaders to learn very different ways of thinking and listen to how collective wisdom can help and collaboration can be done in a very different way to how we think it should be done as part of Western businesses. So thank you, Jade, for the opportunity, and I'll hand over to Pok.
Yeah, it's epic. I've just left a point or a challenge in the chat, which is actually I encourage you to be mentored by a high schooler. So not you mentoring them, but you listening to what, you know, like how they can teach us, like, because there is no way for us to anticipate a new world without actually understanding what it's like for people born into a new world. So that is my challenge. But I also, we haven't come to a conclusion from today's discussion, but such is the result when we are in a state of struggle. And I don't think struggle is bad. And in fact, I have a quote that I always refer to, and it's by Jason Hickel, and he says, "Hope in and of itself is not enough. Our hope will only ever be as strong as our struggle. So continue to struggle, and a struggle is capable of bringing us to a new future." So with that, don't be afraid of open-ended conversations. Don't be afraid of agreeing to disagree. Like this is the future. The future is plurality, but it's about learning different viewpoints and it's struggling and having struggles with hope. And that's something I hope to leave you with. I'll pass it to Ian.
Thanks. I'm going to go super quick. We'll get to dinner. I've loved this conversation actually, and it was so completely different from what I thought it would be, because, and I came in thinking this is not about technology, it's about behavior and culture. And then we had so much conversation on behavior and culture, and then we talked about New Zealand culture and, you know, the collaboration. But I think clearly having a sense of kind of what we want to look like in the future is great. But I love what Murray's just put in the chat, which they're talking about the power of identity and what's the story we want to tell about, you know, our identity as we go forward. And I think that's, for me, that's, as you kind of think about why don't we collaborate, why don't we do these kinds of things, is partly because of how we see ourselves as these kind of pioneer, well, I guess the people who've come in the last 180 years, at least, feeling that we're pioneers, and that's kind of who we are, and that's holding us back. So let's kind of rethink what our identity is going forward, and that could really help us as a nation with culture, behaviours, and then getting in behind this. So loved it. Thank you, everyone. Yeah.
Oh, kia ora. Thank you, Ian. Hock and Saskia as well. And thank you all for spending your wonderful evening with us. Yeah, so many golden words of wisdom. I will be sure to write this up, share the recording, share the slides with you very shortly as well. And if you're keen on learning more, definitely reach out and to myself or Jaina as well. But kia ora, thank you. And let's close with a karakia and let you get on your way. Me karakia tato. Ke whakaria te tapu, kia wātia ai te ara, kia turiki whakataha ai, kia turiki whakataha ai, haumie huie, tai kie.
Kia ora.
Kia ora.
Aye.